While many have claimed to foresee what horrors lie ahead, no one has seen them more clearly than the world's most famous prophet, Nostradamus.
Before Nostradamus became known as a mysterious and enigmatic prophet, he first worked as an apothecary and helped in plague-stricken areas. His real name is Michel de Nostradamus. He was born in December 1503 in Saint-Rémy de Provence in southern France. It is not certain whether December 14 or December 21 is the exact date of his birth. His father, Jacques de Nostradamus, was a notary or a person who creates and certifies legal documents. His mother, Rainier, came from a well-known family in their town. He had many siblings, but the exact number is unclear because birth records from that time are incomplete. His father's family had Jewish roots. Before Michel was born, his ancestors had already converted to Catholic Christianity. Life was difficult for many Jewish families in Europe at that time. They were often persecuted, forced to leave their homes, or pressured to change their religion. When his grandfather converted, the family used the surname Nostradamus. Its meaning is Our Lady, a title for the Virgin Mary. But even though it was clear that the family had Jewish ancestry, it was said that they still secretly practiced Judaism and personally taught Michel the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is a tradition of Jewish mysticism. It is about the creation of God and the connection of the spiritual world to human life. It spread in some Jewish communities in Spain and southern France. Even before the time of Nostradamus, some writers said that it influenced the vague and symbolic way Nostradamus wrote. That could be true because it was part of the intellectual world in his region. But there are no clear documents proving how deeply he personally studied this. There is also little reliable information about his childhood. There is an old story that he was taught medicine by his grandfather, his mother's father. Furthermore, around 1518 or 1519, he entered the University of Avignon, one of the oldest universities in France. He was not yet studying to become a doctor at that time. The usual subjects studied by students were grammar, rhetoric, and logic. They also read the works of Greek and Roman thinkers such as Aristotle and Cicero. Its aim was to train a student in speaking, writing, and forming clear arguments. But his studies did not last long. A plague spread in the region, and the university was forced to close. Whenever there was an outbreak back then, people avoided crowded cities. Those who had money would move to the countryside because diseases spread faster in densely populated areas. After the university closed, Michel reportedly traveled for several years to different parts of France and nearby areas. He studied plants, herbal remedies, and making medicine. This is where he started working as an apothecary. An apothecary back then was basically an early pharmacist. He made mixtures from plants, spices, and other ingredients. But most of their medicines were not yet scientific. Often these were only based on tradition, observation, and beliefs that were passed down through many generations. Medicine back then was still far from what we know today. There were no antibiotics like penicillin yet. There were no modern vaccines yet, and there was still no clear knowledge about bacteria and viruses. That's why even simple infections that are easy to treat today could be fatal back then. One of the most common treatments at that time was bloodletting. Doctors would remove some of the patient's blood because they believed it was necessary to balance the body's liquids, which they called humors. When a person was sick, they thought there was too much blood or another fluid in the body. This practice actually made the patient's condition worse. The sick patient only becomes weaker, especially when more of his blood is taken. But because that was the accepted medical belief at the time, many doctors continued to do it. In 1529, Michel entered the University of Montpellier to study medicine. Montpellier is known for having one of the oldest medical schools in Europe. But after some time, he encountered a problem. The university officials found out that he had already worked as an apothecary. This was prohibited for their students. At that time, making and selling medicine was considered a manual trade. During that period, universities held their own academic training in high regard. They often considered manual work as a job for the lower class. Because of this, Michel was expelled from the university. There are still documents about his expulsion in the records of Montpellier. Because of this, It's unclear whether he actually obtained an official doctorate in medicine. Instead of stopping completely, he continued making medicine and helping communities. He gradually became known for dealing with the plague. It was one of the most dangerous diseases in Europe at that time. The plague didn't just strike during the Black Death of the 1340s. It kept coming back to different cities for many centuries. It often spread in places through which merchants, travelers, ships, and goods from other regions passed. Because southern France was on important trade routes, it often experienced outbreaks. When there was news of a plague in a certain place, the entry of people and products would be restricted. In some ports in Italy, ships were made to wait before being allowed to dock. This is where the concept of quarantine originated, from the word referring to 40 days. One of the things Michel did against the plague was what he called rose pills. These contained rose petals, cloves, cypress, and other fragrant herbs. Its scent may have helped mask the foul smell of the surroundings, but it had no ability to kill the bacteria that caused the plague. However, rose pills were not the only thing he recommended. He also encouraged keeping the surroundings clean, washing items, removing corpses immediately, and giving patients fresh air. He also did not rely on bloodletting like many doctors at that time. These methods were still not enough to truly cure the plague. But cleanliness and avoiding contaminated places made more sense than drawing blood from an already weak patient. Because he was willing to go to places with outbreaks, his name became well known in southern France. He was not yet famous for astrology or prophecies. At this point in his life, he was first known as an apothecary and healer during the time of the plague, a man who used the limited knowledge of his time to fight a disease that was not yet fully understood even by the best doctors in Europe. The biggest change in the life of Michel de Nostradamus began with a profound personal tragedy. In the early 1530s, he lived in Agen in southwestern France. He was invited there by Jules Caesar Scaliger, a renowned doctor and scholar from Italy. Scaliger was very knowledgeable and had many books about medicine, history, philosophy, and ancient literature. It's possible that his library helped broaden Michel's reading and ideas. While in Agen, Michel married a local woman. That wasn't her real name, but she was often referred to as Henriette d'Ancos. They had 2 children. But in 1534, his wife and children died. It is often said that the plague was the cause, but there are not enough records to confirm the exact illness that killed them. What is clear is that Michel lost his first family all at once. For someone who helped people in places struck by the plague, this was a heavy burden. He could give advice to other families, but he couldn't save his own wife and children. After this, he left Agen and began traveling again. There are also stories that he had problems with the church in 1538 because of something he said that was considered heretical, but it's not clear if he was actually put on formal trial for heresy. Europe was a dangerous place at that time for anyone suspected of opposing the church. The Protestant Reformation was spreading, and the conflict between Catholics and Protestants was intensifying. Even a wrong word could get you in trouble. A false accusation could bring serious trouble. It's possible that Michel traveled to different parts of France and Italy in the following years. In Italy, he saw firsthand the rapid growth of the printing industry. Because of the printing press, it became much easier to produce and sell many copies of a book. This was important because eventually it wouldn't just be medicine that would make him famous. The printing presses would carry his name to different parts of Europe. But before he became a writer, he first returned to helping fight against the plague. In the mid-1540s, he helped deal with the outbreak in Marseille and in other places in Provence. He became known for being willing to go to communities with many sick people. There are stories that some cities gave him a pension as payment for his services. In 1547, he finally settled in Salon de Provence. There, he married Anne Ponsard, a wealthy widow. They had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. Since Anne had her own wealth and Michel also had his own income, their life became much better. He no longer needed to constantly travel to places with plague. He had time to write and study astrology. During the Renaissance, the distinction between astronomy and astrology was not yet clear. Many educated people believed that the movements of the planets and stars affected the weather, diseases, politics, and human destiny. It wasn't just ordinary citizens who believed in this. Even wealthy families, kings, queens, and political leaders would consult astrologers for advice about their health, marriage, children, and future. So in 1550, Michel released his first almanac. An almanac is a small and inexpensive booklet with information for a particular year. It could contain a calendar, weather forecasts, farming advice, important dates, and astrological predictions. It was cheaper to make than a big book, so more people could afford to buy it. It's like a small yearly guide that's easy to carry and read. On the cover of his almanac, Michel used the Latin version of his name, Nostradamus. It sounded stronger and more mysterious than Michel de Nostradamus. From then on, that was the name the public knew him by. His first almanac sold well, so he started releasing new editions every year. Usually these contained predictions about the weather, diseases, political unrest, and possible events involving famous people. Because of this, his name became more well-known. Wealthy merchants, nobles, and other powerful people began to seek his advice. They wanted to know if their business would be successful, if their family would be safe, or what might happen in their future. But he didn't write simple, clear forecasts. He used symbols, old place names, unusual words, and lines with many possible meanings. Sometimes he also mixed French with Latin, Greek, Italian, and the language used in the province. Because of this, it was hard to prove his predictions wrong. If an interpretation did not come true, other people could simply say that their understanding was wrong. If an event happened that was even slightly similar to what he wrote, it could be presented as the fulfillment of the prophecy. This was the key to Nostradamus' success. In 1555, he released the first part of his most famous book, Prophecies. The first edition contained 353 quatrains and a long message for his son, Caesar. A quatrain is a short poem consisting of 4 lines. He grouped them together into collections called centuries. This does not mean that each group refers to 100 years. It was only called a century because most groups were planned to have 100 quatrains each. In the following editions, the collection was further expanded. The most complete version, released after his death in 1568, had 942 quatrains divided into 10 centuries. Most of the prophecies in La Prophecy are not tied to a specific year. This is the main difference compared to his yearly almanacs. Because there are no clear dates, a quatrain can be linked to an event that happened years later, centuries later, or even in the present time. Many of his poems are about kings, queens, wars, the fall of cities, famine, plagues, storms, fires, and other disasters. He also used names from ancient Greece and Rome, including gods, heroes, and former military leaders. He mentioned various parts of Europe, the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Balkans, and areas that were once under the Ottoman Empire. This was not unusual for an educated writer during the Renaissance. At that time, Europeans' knowledge about other countries was expanding because of new discoveries in different parts of the world and the growth of empires. The vastness of the places and disasters he mentioned gave his poems almost endless uses. Whenever there was a war, there were lines that could be connected to it. Whenever there was an earthquake, flood, or the death of a leader, there was also a quatrain that could be made to fit it. This does not automatically prove that he saw the future. It only shows how broad and vague his way of writing was. In other words, Nostradamus did not make clear predictions. He wrote enigmatic poems that could be given new meanings, depending on the events the reader wanted to associate them with. And because there are always wars, disasters, and changes in government, people continue to find new ways to say that his words have come true. The secret to the popularity of Nostradamus' prophecies is not just the topics he wrote about. More important is the way he wrote them. He mentioned many places from France, Italy, Spain, and England to the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and the territories of the Ottoman Empire. Sometimes he doesn't just use countries. He also includes the names of cities, islands, rivers, and old regions. Because of this, Many people from different countries can find lines they can relate to their own history. When there is a war or disaster in a place, there is a possibility that Nostradamus mentioned a similar sounding name. But this doesn't mean that he saw every event in the future. He liked to use old names that were used during the time of the Roman Empire. He also used stories about kings, queens, emperors, uprisings, plagues, and the fall of kingdoms. Many of these ideas did not come from a mysterious vision. According to the study of his works, he took a lot of material from the Bible, ancient history books, medieval chronicles, and older collections of prophecies. Among the works he read were those of Suetonius and Plutarch, who wrote about the lives, wars, triumphs, and downfalls of famous leaders of Greece and Rome. So when Nostradamus tells stories about a cruel ruler, a falling empire, or a feuding royal family, it's not always a new vision. He may have taken the pattern from a real event in the past and transferred it to an uncertain future. He also used a collection called the Mirabilis Liber. It was published in France in 1522 and contains older Christian predictions about war, disaster, the Antichrist, and the end of the world. There are also parts of his writings that resemble those of Girolamo Savonarola, an Italian friar who preached about God's punishment and social change. In the introduction of Nostradamus's book, many excerpts from the Bible appeared in almost the same arrangement as those used by Savonarola. Nowadays, this could be called copying or excessive borrowing. But writing conventions were different in the 16th century. It was common back then to take, modify, and combine passages from older books without clear citation. It's also not certain if he carefully chose each source. Some researchers believe that he systematically read and then combined the ideas that suited what he wanted to write. Others say he used a method similar to randomly opening a book. If he found a story on the chosen page, he would use it as the basis for a new quatrain. This cannot be fully proven, but it is clear that many parts of his writings originated from older texts. The legend also grew that he used fire, water, magic rituals, or a strange trance before he could see the future. And in his own writings, his explanation is simpler. He said he simply tried to make his mind quiet and calm before writing. He also didn't always call himself a prophet. He described what he was doing more as studying astrology, history, and possible patterns of events. It's important to remember that his world was very different from ours. In the 16th century, major changes in science were just beginning. Nicholas Copernicus published the idea that the Earth and other planets revolve around the Sun. This challenged the long-held belief that the Earth was the center of everything. At the same time, the Protestant Reformation was dividing Western Christianity. Catholics and Protestants were fighting. Some kingdoms were falling. New powers were rising. And many people believed that God's great punishment was near. The map of the world was also expanding. European sailors had reached the Americas. Portugal found a sea route to India by sailing around Africa, and in the early 1520s, the expedition started by Ferdinand Magellan completed the first successful voyage around the world. During this time, science, religion, astrology, alchemy, and magic were still mixed together. The boundaries between real science and old beliefs were not yet clear. Even some serious scholars at that time studied the movement of planets, while also searching for ways to turn other metals into gold. So it's not unusual that someone with a background in medicine, like Nostradamus, also used astrology and ancient prophecy. But it's not his era that's the reason why he's still famous today. People continue to talk about him because it's said that he predicted some of the biggest disasters in history. The problem is, most of the time, it's only after an event happens that people look for the quatrain that could match it. One example is the Great Fire of London in September 1666. The fire started in a bakery and spread to a large part of the city. Nostradamus has a quatrain that refers to London, fire, and a number that could be interpreted as 66. Because of this, his followers said that he predicted the disaster exactly. But some details do not match. The poem mentioned lightning, but it wasn't lightning that started the fire. There was also a hint that many people would die, while only a few official deaths were recorded. So it only seems impressive when you pick out the parts that matched and ignore the parts that were wrong. The same thing happened with the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Nostradamus had poems about great turmoil in France, a new ruler and fear in Italy, Spain, and England. This can be linked to Napoleon, but it can also be applied to many wars in Europe. When chaos erupts in a kingdom, it's normal for a new leader to emerge, and it's also natural for France's neighboring countries to get involved. A quatrain about a child born into a poor family who will use his speech to win over many people is also linked to Adolf Hitler. This seems to fit Hitler, but there is no clear name, date, Germany, Nazi Party, or Second World War in the actual line. The description of a powerful leader who is a great speaker could refer to many other people in history. Some say that Nostradamus also predicted the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because he wrote about a great plague that would strike 2 cities. But there was no mention of Japan, atomic bomb, radiation, or August 1945. The phrase 2 cities is a common expression that can also be found in older religious and historical writings. A line about evil falling from above was also linked to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But such a statement is very broad. It can be used for any leader who was shot, bombed, fell, or was assassinated from a high place. The clearest example of a false association is the September 11 attacks in 2001. Back then, Nostradamus' supposed prophecy about 2 steel birds falling from the sky and hitting a big city spread on the internet. But Nostradamus never wrote those words. It was a modern text that was spread after the attack. There is no solid evidence in his actual books that he exactly predicted the Twin Towers attacks. Here, we can see the real reason why Nostradamus always seems to be right. His poems are short. There are no clear dates. The names are confusing. There are many symbols. And they're all events that keep repeating in history: war, fire, disease, assassination of leaders, and the fall of governments. Whenever a major tragedy happens, that's when people look for lines that can be matched to it. Sometimes the translation is changed. Only the right parts are chosen, and the details that don't fit are left out. So the biggest mystery isn't how Nostradamus saw the future. The more important question is how every generation managed to turn his old words, which have no single clear meaning, into new prophecies. The supposed prophecy about 2 steel birds falling on a great city was not actually written by Nostradamus. These lines only spread after the September 11 attacks in 2001. Later, more lines were added about a river filled with blood and the dead walking again. These were not in the original prophecies. This shows the big problem with Nostradamus' reputation. Many predictions attributed to him have been altered, mistranslated, or completely made up by other people. The same thing is happening with the so-called prophecies attributed to him for modern times. Some people are linking his verses to the ascension of King Charles III, the war in Ukraine, climate change, and even the journey to Mars. There is a quatrain about a king of the islands who will be replaced by a person who was not expected to become king. Some people associate this with King Charles and Prince Harry, but the names Charles, William, Harry, or Britain are not mentioned in the poem itself. There is also no clear date. The claim that he predicted climate change is similar, because he wrote about extreme heat, boiling seas, crop destruction, and famine. But drought, hunger, and extreme heat were also common topics in religious and historical writings at that time. There's also a line about a great war that will last for 7 months. This is associated with various conflicts, but it doesn't say where it will happen, who will be involved, or when it will start. There's another quatrain about the extreme rise in the price of wheat, to the point that people are forced to eat their fellow man. This is often used to predict the collapse of the food supply. But this kind of image has long been a symbol of severe famine and the destruction of society. In other words, there's no solid basis to say that Nostradamus made an exact prediction about Mars, Ukraine, the royal family, or any particular modern year. Most of these are modern interpretations. His poems are really hard to understand. He mixed French, Latin, Greek, Italian, and the language used in Provence at that time. He also used symbols, old place names, anagrams, and words with many possible meanings. He may have done this to make his book more mysterious, but it could also be a way to protect himself. In the 16th century, it was dangerous to be accused of using dark magic or pretending to be a prophet. The problem with a vague poem is that it's very easy to match it to almost any event. One example is the word Hister. Many people say that this refers to Hitler, but during Nostradamus' time, Hister was used as the old name for a part of the Danube River. If you don't know its old meaning, it's easy to mistake it for a misspelling of Hitler. The same goes for the name Rousseau. Some people associate this with the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, even though this was already a common surname in Nostradamus' region before the philosopher was born. A bigger problem is the almost complete lack of exact dates. Out of his many quatrains, only a few have specific years. Most of them don't have a clear time frame, so they can be linked to events that happened 10 years, 100 years, or even 400 years later. Nostradamus explained that history is cyclical. For him, wars, uprisings, disasters, and the downfall of leaders happen repeatedly. There's some truth to this, but because he didn't provide clear dates and details, it's almost impossible to test whether a prediction is right or wrong. When the Prophecies were first published in Lyon in 1555, he didn't immediately receive nothing but admiration. Some admired him, but others considered him a fraud, crazy, or someone who used occult practices. Now, however, his publishers continued to release new editions. He originally planned to write 1,000 quatrains divided into 10 centuries. He was not able to finish it completely. The edition released in 1568, 2 years after his death, contained 942 quatrains. This became the main collection that is still read today. Nostradamus did not only write prophecies, he also wrote a book about cosmetics, medicine, food, preserves, and various mixtures. This included making oils, teeth whiteners, beauty products, and ingredients that were used as aphrodisiacs at that time. This was not unusual during his era. Back then, an apothecary didn't just make medicine. He could also make food, perfumes, makeup, herbal mixtures, and household products. He also wrote about Egyptian hieroglyphs, but at that time, Europeans still couldn't really read what the ancient Egyptian writing said. It would take more than 200 years before the Rosetta Stone helped people understand it. So what he did was only based on older Greek texts and the wrong beliefs of scholars about hieroglyphs. These works show that he was not just waiting for visions. He was a writer, translator, apothecary, astrologer, and a businessman who produced books that the public wanted to read. His name became even more prominent when he was noticed by Catherine de' Medici, the wife of King Henry II of France. Catherine was fond of astrology and was interested in prophecies about her family. She summoned Nostradamus to Paris and reportedly had him make horoscopes for her children. Nostradamus became more famous after Henry II died in 1559. The king was injured in a jousting tournament when his opponent's broken lance pierced through his helmet. He was struck near his eye and died a few days later. This was linked to the quatrain about the young lion defeating the older lion and piercing his eye inside a golden cage. It seems to match, but there are some problems. The poem does not clearly refer to Henry. Neither the king nor his opponent are commonly known as lions, and the golden cage was only interpreted as a helmet after the accident happened. However, the similarities were enough for Catherine and other people in the royal court to believe him even more. Eventually, he was recognized as the advisor and physician of King Charles IV. This gave him additional income, protection, and high status. However, Nostradamus did not live in a grand palace. He stayed with his wife and 6 children in Salon de Provence. He earned from books, almanacs, consultations, and other work. They also invested in the Canal de Crapon, a project that brought water from the Durance River to the dry land around Salon. This helped with irrigation and agriculture. This shows that Nostradamus was not only interested in astrology, He also knew how to choose practical investments. By the 1560s, his health was deteriorating. He suffered from gout for a long time, a painful inflammation of the joints. Eventually, he also developed severe swelling of the body due to fluid retention. He even had a final problem with the local authorities when he published an almanac without the required permission. Book inspections were already strict at that time because France was about to enter a long period of religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. In the summer of 1566, he knew his condition was serious. He arranged his will and left his property to his wife and children. He died on July 2, 1566, at the age of 62. There is a famous story that he told his secretary on the night before he died that he would not be seen alive by sunrise. He may have said this because he knew he was close to dying. It's also possible that the story was exaggerated to make it seem like he predicted his own end. There are also many legends about his tomb. It is said that when his remains were moved in 1700, a medallion was found with the inscription 1700. There's also a story that soldiers opened his tomb during the French Revolution and were later killed, just as he had supposedly predicted. But there are different versions of these stories, so it's safer to consider them as legends added to his mysterious reputation, not solid history. In the following centuries, the prophecies became even more popular. Whenever there was a war, fire, assassination, epidemic, or major disaster, people would look for his poems again. Interest grew even stronger in the 20th century. He is associated with Hitler, the atomic bomb, the death of Kennedy, and many other modern tragedies. There are books and television programs that claim they can communicate with Nostradamus from the afterlife. Along with this, there was also an increase in false quotes and fabricated stories about him. Many people know his name. Even if they have never read his actual book, they have made him the subject of movies, documentaries, novels, and video games. In popular culture, he is often portrayed as a man who clearly saw the future, but a different picture emerges when you study his real life. He did not grow up as a mysterious prophet. He was an apothecary who witnessed many deaths because of the plague. He earned a living as a healer, traveled, and met various scholars. And eventually, he used astrology, history, religion, and old books to create vague poems about the future. Most likely, what he witnessed while facing the plague had a great impact on him. He repeatedly saw sickness, fear, hunger, and death. So it's not surprising that his poems are full of fire, war, drought, plague, and the fall of kingdoms. And this is also the reason why he was not forgotten. If his poems were only about simple tasks, they might have been lost a long time ago. But he wrote about the things that people fear in every era. Because there is no clear date and so many possible meanings to his words, each new generation finds its own disaster that can be linked to him. Nostradamus may not have seen the future, but he clearly understood something about people. As long as there is fear of the next war, disease, or great disaster, there will always be someone who will open his book and search for warnings in the words written almost 500 years ago.